Hey everybody, despite what the clock on the wall said, it's been 7 p.m.
Took the overburden off, you can't hear anything.
Yeah. It's all settled in for.
Couldn't even see.
Evening in Mesoamerica, but first. You'll have to hear from me if I can make this screen work the way I want it to. All right, everyone. Welcome to the September 14th, 2023 meeting of North Texas Archaeological Society. It is the first time in 5 months it's not 250 degrees outside, so thank you all for braving this cool fall weather. Join us finally at this birth. Greetings to some new members. We welcomed 6 new and or returning members since our August meeting. Speaking of new faces, some of you are aware that Ashley Lemke, who is a longtime member of the North Texas Archaeological Society and a professor of archaeology at the University of Texas Arlington, moved on to cheesier pastures in Wisconsin. So, joining us this evening is Robin Dodge, who is a visiting assistant professor at UT Arlington. Her focus is on Maya archaeology in Belize. Wonderful presentation for you to come to. She will be working at UTA for at least the next year, and hopefully we'll see her around at meetings moving forward. So please welcome Dr. Robin Dodge. Speaking of Ashley Lemke, our TAS annual meeting is the weekend of October 6th through the 8th. Dr. Lemke will be the banquet presenter at that meeting. Also one of our esteemed North Texas Archaeological Society members, Doug Boyd, will be the public forum speaker at the meeting. So if you have not signed up for the TAS annual meeting, you can no longer stay at the hotel where all the fun stuff happens, but you can still attend the meeting during the day. So this is a reminder too that NTAS scholarships for activities such as TAS Academies, TAS Field School, and the annual meeting are available to anyone who applies. Non-NTAS members may apply, and if they receive a scholarship, they will also receive a membership to NTAS. This is a reminder that our October 2023 guest speaker, Richard Breha, who is in the room with us tonight, will be presenting on battlefield archaeology. I am looking forward to that presentation. We have one more pitch pot kit making session, and that means I only have to say it that one more time. It's a tongue twister. It is going to be this Saturday, September 16th at the Fort Worth Nature Center and Refuge from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. If you have already signed up with Molly Hall, you should have received an email this evening or will be receiving an email this evening. If you have not been in touch with her and want to participate on Saturday, you have until noon tomorrow to get in touch with her. This is only so that we can get you on a list so that you can enter the Fort Worth Nature Center and Refuge for free. Our November 9th NTAS guest speaker is going to be Jimmy Arterberry of the Comanche Nation. He is a former TIPO for the Comanche. It is not going to be a typical NTAS presentation in the sense that he's not going to get up here and, I will refer to it as a lecture, present to us individually, monologuing for half an hour, 45 minutes. It's going to be more like a roundtable session for us to have a conversation with him and potentially other members of the Comanche who come with him about Comanche history, about archaeology, Comanche archaeology, etc. So please, 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 if you have any topics you would like to discuss with Mr. Arterberry while he's here, send us an email to info@ntxas.org, and we will start compiling those so that we can have a nice conversation with Mr. Arterberry on the night. October is Texas Archaeology Month. We have 2 outreach opportunities during Texas Archaeology Month. The first is the DAS Pioneer Heritage Festival. This has the unfortunate coincidence of overlapping with the TAS annual meeting weekend. It is on October 7th. We have a couple of volunteers, but we'd love to have a few more if you're available. It's an event that lasts all day, starting at about 10 a.m. But that does not mean that you have to stay the whole time. So if you're available for a couple hours here and there in that window from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., please get in touch with Katrina Nuncio and let her know that you're interested, and we'll move forward with that. The second one is Denton Dig-It, which is held in Denton during their, I'm going to say, weekly farmers market. I don't know that for sure. That could be a lie, but there's definitely a farmers market on that day. It is October 28th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. We're going to have a couple of tables set up there. We're going to be next to a blacksmith who was involved in the Bolivar Archaeological Project. We are going to have some demonstrations. There's going to be other archaeologists there. If it's a selling point at all, NTAS is not responsible for managing the excavation beds. NTAS does not have to be involved with that. That should be a selling point. Ask anybody who participated last year. And finally, we have several field and lab work opportunities the second half of this month, one of which is potentially starting on Monday, September 18th. As well as in October, our Vice President of Projects, Brian Luchford, has been hard at work trying to identify opportunities for field work for NTAS members. So if you have any interest in participating in any one of the currently 3 potential field projects, please get in touch with him at vp-of-projects@ntxas.org. And finally, please join me in welcoming our September 2023 guest speaker, Dr. Sherman.
Okay, well, can you hear me here? Okay, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you all for coming out. I always want to say thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for coming. My name is Sherman Horn, and I have worked in the Maya area now for about 20 years. And I want to talk to you a little bit about tonight some of the work that we just kind of wrapped up in a site called El Pilar, which is in actually right kind of cut in half by the border of Belize and Guatemala. And the survey we've been doing around there that's been guided by Lidar. And so that's kind of the general gist. Now, Alan here informed me that you guys as an audience are pretty well informed about 1, Maya, and 2, maybe Lidar. So it used to be even about 4 or 5 years ago, I would have to kind of explain what Lidar is to an audience of archaeologically enthusiastic or interested people. Now it seems like everybody knows what Lidar is. So I'm going to skip that, which will kind of help cut down on the time of this talk. But if you have questions about Lidar, I'd be happy to answer them later. If you don't know what Lidar is, just a kind of a shorthand for it. It's kind of like radar, but with lasers, and it gives you really, really nice pictures and stuff and maps. And so I think most of you know something about the ancient Maya. There were people that inhabited Central America. We're looking at the lowland Maya in particular here, and you probably know some of the very famous temples, like this is an example from Naranjo in Guatemala. And so I'm presuming a little bit of background here, but again, I'm happy to answer questions later about Maya if you have them. So
Are we sharing screen?
Yeah, sure. Okay, should be.
you know, should I check
Is
here
it
if
not
this
showing up?
didn't have?
We shared. So that we could use the thing. It's not showing up on.
Now it's showing.
Now we're good.
Thank you.
Okay, so as a Maya archaeologist, I was enthralled back at the beginning of kind of the second decade of the century when the first papers started coming out about the use of Lidar, this brand new technology then. Actually, the technology itself wasn't new, but the application to archaeology was new. When Arlen and Diane Chase used this and published on it at a big Maya site called Caracol in Belize, and we started seeing images like what you see here of these big pyramid complexes being revealed. If you've ever been to Caracol, you'll know it doesn't look nice and open like this when you're there. It's covered in jungle and bush. So to see these kind of images coming out, and you can see here from the cross section, pointers going there. These are all the Lidar returns of the trees that are over top of those standing structures. This really kicked off kind of a revolution in Maya archaeology. Certainly, what's been
Mouse. Now do it.
okay. Certainly, we've seen a lot of images coming out. Seemed like it was every other month or so from the Maya area, and then also of Lidar images, and then also of areas across the world in the last, let's say, 5 years. People realizing that the public is very interested in these images. I mean, they're fascinating. Maybe click back here and we'll get this to go again. But here are some images of Tikal made by Lidar, and here are images of hill forests in Europe that were then put on what was used to be known as Twitter, showing just what Lidar can reveal about archaeological structures. And I was putting together a talk for a conference in Mexico City at the end of June, and I was kind of putting together some stuff about Lidar, and then all of a sudden a brand new publication came out about a site that was revealed in Campeche and in the Yucatan Peninsula by Lidar, again showing some very large structures. Usually not technologically illiterate. Let's see, there we go. Some very large structures here, hidden in the jungle, and being revealed by Lidar and producing these very beautiful images. This place was visited by archaeologists and documented. And this hit the press right before I was going to give this presentation, or a different presentation, but my presentation on Lidar and allure. And I thought, well, okay, it's still going, right? The revolution is ongoing. And it hasn't stopped yet. Now, I want to talk about, we talk about this kind of revolution that Lidar has brought to Maya archaeology, and I kind of want to distill some of the, what this technology has brought to the field into kind of three promises. And this is oversimplifying it a bit, but I think it kind of gets to the core of what Lidar has meant recently to Maya archaeology and what Maya archaeologists have done with Lidar. One is the idea that this will find lost cities. And to put it more prosaically, as we've been talking about as professional Maya archaeologists, this is like revealing large-scale monumental architecture. But to the general public, this is often framed as finding the lost cities. Here's the new thing that was in the jungle, and this technology is showing it to us. There is this promise that this will revolutionize Maya settlement pattern studies. And this is a big one for professional archaeologists. Maya settlement pattern studies for a long time were seen as kind of deficient at the regional scale because the area where the ancient Maya lived is covered in jungle, and it's very difficult to do these big, multi-kilometer site-to-site surveys. Some had happened before Lidar, but to really get a sense of settlement on the grand scale, it was very difficult to do. We'll say, and we really didn't have the means to do it. Well, maybe Lidar offers us that chance. That is a promise. And then third, it offers the promise of illuminating Maya land use strategies. And what we often see this kind of topic discussed as is revealing things like raised fields or canals or terraces or different ways that the Maya terraformed their environment to do different things with it. Usually we talk about this in terms of agricultural production. So what I want to do is kind of go through my experience working at the site El Pilar, which we just finished a 10-year survey, surveying 20 square kilometers with Lidar as our guide, and talk about these three topics or promises and frame them kind of in my own experience here. And then at the end, we'll kind of talk about if we are, as Maya archaeologists, meeting these, if the promises are being kept, if we're kind of, living up to the potential of using this Lidar, or if there is more work to do. And if you've ever seen an archaeological presentation, there's always more work to do. Okay, so just to catch you up on where we're talking about here, ancient Maya city El Pilar, some quick facts here. It's located on the border of Belize and Guatemala. You can see it right here. This is it within its settlement landscape. There are many large sites around it. And it's at kind of an ecotonal position where you have the Petén escarpment in here, where you have the giant site of Tikal and some of these larger sites. Naranjo I mentioned here, these are all of these kind of very karstic, very broken limestone hills, all of it covered in jungle. And then as you move to the east, this way, the escarpment kind of levels off and you get down to a coastal plain, which continues out to the Caribbean Sea in Belize. So it's at this kind of ecotonal position where the escarpment, you can see it kind of running like this and then up. And so it's at the boundary of these different landforms. It is 15 kilometers away from several very large sites, including here, Naranjo, Chinantaniche, Cajalpech here, where I did my dissertation work, and then a little bit farther away from Tikal and some of those big interior sites. And surrounding the site itself is this 20 square kilometer binational peace park that is set up as an archaeological reserve where we've done the survey. So at the site, we have over 150 hectares of monumental architecture, and that's really just in the site epicenter, which is in here. We have 3 ball courts, internal sock bay or causeways that run between the big monumental complexes, royal residences, administrative structures, all that kind of good stuff, the kind of classic Maya, big center stuff. We have 2 minor centers within the 20 square kilometers. This one up here is called Cum. This one down here is called Choro. We have 3 smaller E-group structures, which are a special kind of religious and public ceremonial architecture that may have probably originally had something to do with astronomical observations. We can talk about that a little bit later if you'd like. But we have those complexes here, Naranjal, Amatal, and Cebolito down here. We have an extensive zone of berms, terraces, and other landscape modifications up in the north. And then all across the area here, we have settlements. Not so much on the peaks of the steepest hills and places marked by red there, but all across the area we have the remains of Maya settlement. And so this LiDAR survey that we've done, that we actually just finished again this season in 2023, began with an initial survey way back in 1984, which is at the beginning of this gift, that found the main site here. And bits and pieces of it, you can see have been added as the years tick down there, or tick up there, year by year, kind of showing our progress of the survey. And then as I got here, I realized we don't have the 2023 stuff on this gift yet, so we're gonna work on that. But you can see here at the progress of the survey in terms of what we mapped and how we slowly kind of worked this in and filled this stuff in, where each of these places that you're seeing on there were not just identified in the LiDAR and drawn on the map. We went out there and saw them. We went out there and saw them and took GPS points and measured them and assessed if they were something or not. And we went out to look at things that we had identified on the LiDAR as being potentially a house mount or something like that. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. And you really, you know, in doing this for several years, you really have the sense that you know, not everything that this magical technology is showing you is going to be something on the ground. So to kind of put this in a historical perspective, and then also in perspective of those promises I was talking about, in the early years of the survey, the focus was on downtown El Pilar. So the kind of central core area here with all the big temples and stuff like that. And so here we're kind of looking at promise number one. You know, does LiDAR find the lost cities, the big monumental groups, and that kind of stuff. So the idea here was to verify some large architectural features that had not been seen on the ground before, but showed up quite clearly in the LiDAR, including the citadel here, which here looks to me very much like a kind of Iron Age European hill fort, and indeed has these kind of parapet structures that ring it here. The lower one is quarried right out of the hill, and the upper one consists of boulders and some temple complexes on top. And then this area here is a sunken plaza that actually contains a ball court here. And the question here was, for a long time, we knew that there was a causeway that ran out from the main site this way. You can see those lines clearly here. And we knew that there was another causeway that ran this way from the other side of the epicenter. But where they met, we had no idea. And it turns out that they kind of converged into this area, which is probably a natural depression to begin with, that was kind of scooped out and modified to be a sunken plaza area. So looking at this big stuff in the downtown area, we can clearly see that, yes, indeed, LiDAR does find the big stuff very, very well. In the process of doing this, we learned a lot about how to do survey with LiDAR. I mean, we have some traditional kind of survey techniques that anybody who's done archaeology around Texas probably knows about and how to do. But those had to be modified to work in the jungle. And we integrated some new kind of protocols. We came up with new methods to take GPS field maps and to integrate these into a GIS to track our movements and know where we had surveyed and create accurate maps after that. So these early years that we were doing it, and actually this is before I even got to the project, this is what was going on. We're kind of learning how to do this. So out of these early years of experimentation come a couple of lessons. One that I already mentioned, LiDAR is an excellent tool for identifying large features. Okay, so we can say promise one there is kept. Okay. Lesson number two, digital data sets that this kind of work produces are enormous. And you really need to have a data management plan. This doesn't really, pertain to any of the promises I talked about earlier. But one thing I've noticed is that when you read papers about LiDAR in the Maya area, you read or you talk to people, nobody really wants to talk about this. And I'll tell you, I didn't really want to talk about it very much either, because I knew there were a lot of problems there. And one thing that really helped us out, which is, I won't say helped us out, but we kind of made lemons out of lemonade here. We had 2 years where we couldn't go in the field because of COVID. And those 2 years we spent getting this data in shape. And I'll tell you, it took us about all of those 2 years to put this all together in a way that made sense. So we move forward in time to 2016. We really wanted to test the LiDAR to examine settlements in the area to see if it's really showing us everything that we want to see, or is it really only showing us the big stuff? And to do this, we looked at a low-lying area on this map here. Red is kind of high and steep, and green is low and flat. In the northeast here, that really didn't. We after visually examining the LiDAR, we didn't really find a lot of what we would call targets or go-to points in this area. So we want to see if this is a problem with the data itself, or a problem with how we're interpreting the LiDAR, or if there was nothing there. So this is what it looked like with our go-to points, these places that we identified in the LiDAR imagery as potential mounds or potential other kinds of features. These are the ones that we had identified. This is what the landscape looks like there. It's what we call a corazal bajo. So it's a low-lying area, can be seasonally inundated. You won't really find standing water there that often, but you might find it after heavy rainstorms in the rainy season. But it's pretty dense and kind of scrubby bush. And so to get through this stuff and to really see if there was stuff there, we did an old-fashioned kind of survey where we plotted transect lines through our different quadrants. And we checked all of our go-to points. And we found that on this, what you're seeing here, the red triangles are go-to points that turned out to be something. There was actually something there. And the X's, black X's, which hopefully you can see them here, are things that did not pan out, or we thought there was something and it wasn't there. But what you can see from this is that this area where we really hadn't identified anything in the LiDAR is actually pretty blank. There's nothing there. So the LiDAR did very well. So coming out of this test, we have a couple more lessons that bear on the promises we were talking about earlier, which is that the first one here, LiDAR is useful for identifying plazoela groups. So those are groups of house mounds up on a raised platform. Larger residential mounds. So in this sense, promise number 2 about identifying settlement is maybe being kept. If there are few LiDAR signatures in an area, like the one we were just looking at, you can be reasonably confident that there are a few settlement remains there. But, and this is where the keeping of promise number 2 gets a little bit into the weeds. LiDAR is not a perfect tool for prospecting for small, low, and irregularly shaped features. So I can point out here, hopefully you can see this long line here. This is a very low berm. It was over 100 meters, so it was quite large, but it was very low. It was maybe 20 centimeters off the ground. We didn't see that at all on the LiDAR. We might not have seen it at all in the bush if the bushfire hadn't come through before we went to survey. And if we had just said, okay, it doesn't look like there's anything there, we would have never found. This is a particularly interesting group of features in this area because as you kind of see here, there is a dry stream bed or arroyo that runs through here. And all of these kind of berms and potential little check dams there seem to be positioned to control the flow of that water, to keep it from going one way or to channel it to another. So those are things that we might have missed if we had just looked at the imagery and drawn in the mounds as we saw. As we move forward in time with the surveys, it's now 2017 through 2019, we took what we learned from 2016 about what LiDAR can and can't do, or what it does well and what it maybe does less well. We applied that to doing things like remapping the minor center of Coombe, which is here, which is an incredibly crazy place. We came out with a map and like, what what is this weird little thing? It looks like a buck-toothed beaver or something like that. And you go there on the ground and you're just like, I don't know what this is. And the LiDAR doesn't give you any indication either what's going to blob. But so we mapped some of these minor centers, Kum, Amatal here, and Naranjal here. You can see this is that E group configuration I was mentioning before with the eastern structure and the western pyramid structure, same thing here. And as we kind of learned how to do this survey through doing it, we kind of learned how to really kind of target our survey goals and figure out potential targets, and then use things like our knowledge of topography and vegetation to help guide us in a way that LiDAR can help do, but you also need other stuff, that kind of knowledge to do too. So one of the things, that put up this question mark here, we were surveying in this area, we found a whole bunch of house mounds and a lot of little things. And we had people walking in around here and around here, and we got back and looked at the GIS map and looked, okay, here's a blank spot. Do we need to walk through there? Well, we looked at the survey notes. We noted that it was Bajo vegetation. We looked at the LiDAR. We looked here at the signatures. We decided probably not. We don't have to go there because of what our knowledge of the terrain, the vegetation, and then also what this was showing us. So again, we use this kind of knowledge. One of the very interesting aspects of the topography that we looked at was this very large arroyo, which you can see is sitting in there, which kind of comes out of the southwest section of the site. And there is no settlement around it. Well, go figure. I mean, who wants to live like on a steep slope going down into a place that will seasonally flood every year? Nobody does. No Maya in the right mind, no Texan in the right mind, place like that. So one thing we did in this period of time too is we've kind of been doing this as we're going along. We haven't really compiled it yet for 2023 with all of the data. But one thing in 2018 we did look at was kind of a comparison of what we were seeing in the LiDAR in terms of different kinds of features, and then what we weren't seeing but finding in the field. And you can see some of these things that we have listed up here. Well, mounds, okay, we have many with strong LiDAR signatures. And we also have some that have weaker things, but then we since determined that those are much lower, and there's characteristics that we can kind of understand about that. But then you get into looking at some of these other landscape features, like berms, probably something to do with controlling the flow of water in different areas, or growing crops, quarries, and shaltoons. We really have a hard time seeing those. Now, shaltoons are underground storage pits the Maya dug. I wouldn't expect to see those in LiDAR because basically they're a hole in the ground and you kind of trip over them as you're walking through the bush. But if you want to understand the landscape and the settlement, the entire settlement picture, you need to understand these different kinds of things. And you need to get out there and walk around and find them, or you're going to be missing a whole piece of that puzzle. And this is something that, again, LiDAR really wasn't showing us. Same kind of thing with quarries. The LiDAR picks up big quarries along hillsides and stuff like that very well. But as we were walking around, we found many, many smaller quarries, often really close to houses. That's telling us something about how the Maya were using the landscape, how they were extracting materials. And the LiDAR really wasn't helping us very much there. So we move into the last couple of years. This is, you can notice that gap there between 2019 and 2022. That's when we were putting all the data together in the database during COVID times. When we got back in the field in 2022, we put all this hard-won survey knowledge to use. We started mapping our final neighborhood E group here, which we named Cebalito, because there's these huge ceiba trees. This is the big world tree of the ancient Maya iconography that you may have seen that were still growing there. There was a massive fire, another one, that swept through the reserve in 2020. Which had we been in the field in 2020, that might have helped us find some stuff. But getting back there in 2022, it made life miserable. Because if you can imagine a tropical forest, a jungle just in its normal state, imagine what happens when a fire comes through and sweeps out all the underbrush, and then it starts coming back. It is thick, it is nasty, it is often thorny, and it's not fun to go through. But using what we learned about what lidar can show us, what we can say based on the topography, the vegetation, we devise surveys, survey strategies to go through this stuff, and we got the job done. Our final two square kilometers were completed this year, and these were in the south west. This is at Arroyo. I showed you the picture of before that I mentioned, very big and steep thing, and you can see there's not very much in terms of settlement all around it. To kind of give you, some of the numbers we're looking at here, 184 mounds we mapped, 41 glass winglets, 39 sheltoons, and on and on and on, all these different landscape features. And in this area, again, we were a little bit surprised that we weren't finding quite as much stuff. But then we looked at the landscape and it all kind of made sense. You can see some settlement clustering up here. It avoids, for the most part, these kind of lower areas by the arroyo, and it avoids, or the people avoided the very steep slopes here. So just to get into a little bit more of what we found and how this would bear on some of our questions, the promises of LiDAR. Over this 20 square kilometers, we mapped a total of 40 or over 4,600 features, including a bunch of those things I was just talking about. You can see many of them displayed in this graphic here. We were able to kind of redefine a settlement typology of these mounds that we're finding, and kind of devise 3 different functional types of non-monumental architecture. We have what we call primary residential groups, which you can see highlighted here. We have secondary residential units here, this little guy, and then we have solitary range structures, which were a kind of new class of settlement that came out of this survey. And I'll tell you what those are right now. So our settlement units, when we're talking about those PRUs, SRUs, and SRSs, we have 1,300 and almost 1,350 here. And I have one example of each of those on this map. So our SRUs, it's going to be this little guy here, are basically small solitary mounds. And we call these secondary residential units because we don't think people were living there full time. If you look at ethnographic and ethnohistoric literature, the Maya typically have 2 buildings in their houses, at least. They have a place where they sleep, and they have a place where they cook. And that makes a lot of sense for 2 different reasons. Anybody been to Central America? No, Robin has. Yeah. Okay. Anybody been to Texas? Well, it's very hot in both of these places, right? And in a kitchen, it's going to be cooking with fire, of course, and so that's going to be that much hotter. So 1, you want to keep the heat away as much as you can. 2, does anybody know what the Maya made their houses of? Yeah, wattle and daub walls with thatched dried palm roofs. And what is the enemy of all that? Fire, right? So you want the fire away from where you're sleeping. Where you're doing that kind of stuff. So we tend to think that when we find these little mounds, and we have to find them kind of by themselves or solitary, that they're doing something else. They might be a field house where a farmer goes out to his field. He might build a little structure. You can see these in the fields of Belize and Guatemala today, where if he's out farming, a rainstorm comes in, he wants a little shelter. And so maybe something like that. These SRSs, which you can see over here on the right, These are very large mounds. Some of them are 20 meters long, maybe 2 meters high. They are single files of rooms in them. They're all masonry built, and some of them appear to have vaulted rooms. So the classic, Maya coral vault there. We don't know what these things are. We do not think that they're houses. They don't really make sense to be houses. And we think that what they probably serve some kind of administrative function, but we're not quite sure what they are. We'd have to dig some more to find that out. And then we have our primary residential units, which you can see the big example of down here. We think these are the main houses of households. You have more than one mound, or you have maybe one mound on one of these little plazuelas. Or sometimes when we find a single mound that's over a meter high and more than 9 meters long, we think that that's probably a house and that we're just not seeing the kitchen. So that's how we kind of devise these classifications. So we've used these to come up with population estimates and a lot of different ideas about how the Maya were using the landscape at El Pilar. A few questions, and I think I'm pretty close to running out of time here. So a couple things that we've done with these survey results is we've used them to try to look at and identify neighborhoods through some spatial and analytical techniques, using kernel densities and nearest neighbor here, to try to see if they were, if these house mounds are grouping themselves, or the people that built them, like they are grouping themselves in the kind of neighborhoods. This technique was applied to many other sites in a big comparative study that we were a part of. And in other places, it seemed to work pretty well. At El Pilar, it didn't seem to work very, right? You can see a whole bunch of blobs in here, and some of those, I'll tell you, I just more or less objectively drew it because I didn't see a lot of clear clustering. We've also used Lidar in our survey to kind of come at or try to address ideas of household inequality. And this had we did some kind of fancy volumetric studies here using our DEMs from Lidar, and try to look at the level of inequality that may have existed between households in classic period El Pilar. And what this study told us was there was a lot of inequality, which we kind of already knew, but we also were excluding the kind of top tier of the social hierarchy here. We weren't including palaces and stuff like that. This is just between those primary residential units, and there did seem to still be a lot of inequality, which is kind of interesting. We've also used Lidar in our survey to model how the Maya may have used their land in terms of their abilities to grow enough crops to feed themselves. And so what you're looking at here, this is we're in the process of publishing this stuff here, but we presented on the SAAs this year, is a bunch of little 1 hectare plots in the GIF here that are basically kind of standing in for a field that a Maya farmer would have farmed. We know from talking to Maya farmers, current Maya farmers, and looking at ethnographic and ethnohistoric data, that the Maya would typically go out and they would cut a plot, and instead of really, there's kind of this prevailing idea that they would just slash and burn, grow corn, and then move on. That's not really how it works. You go out and yes, you have to slash, yes, you have to burn. You grow some corn there, but as you're growing corn, you're growing all kinds of other plants, and those plants are coming up. And if it gets to a point about 4 years on when you can't really grow corn very well in this one place anymore, you might have to open up a new little spot to grow corn. You're not just abandoning that plot. You are cultivating up to 500 different edible plants and all kinds of trees that you can use to build your house and to have your furniture and to make your utensils and have your medicine and do all that kind of stuff. So what we did was we modeled this kind of 20-year cycle, and as the farmers do that, you get to basically mature forests in about 20-25 years. So we used, and what we data that we were able to get from our LiDAR, data from our settlement survey to look at how this might have worked at El Pilar. And we found that at a fairly high level of labor inputs, the Maya here could have very easily fed themselves. Doesn't quite work that way elsewhere, which is kind of an interesting thing. We're doing a big comparative study of this now to see how this works at other mine sites. So I put Promise 3 up here, kind of getting there. So in this sense, we're kind of working at that landscape idea using LiDAR to try to understand how the Maya may have modified and domesticated their landscape. So some final reflections here on after 10 years of survey doing this stuff with LiDAR. One thing I kind of think about, it took me several years to kind of come around to this, is that for all the press and real kind of public attention that LiDAR imagery of the big monuments, that kind of stuff gets, if you're interested in the settlement, you're interested in the land use, you're interested in figuring out what the Maya were actually doing in their cities, the topographic information that you get from LiDAR is perhaps the most important thing to look at. Yeah, I mean, you can't know about settlement without knowing where all the houses are, and LiDAR can show you some of that. But if you understand the topography and you understand where things could be, that is a very kind of powerful tool in your toolkit for going out and figuring this kind of stuff out. So we need this to kind of fulfill that promise number 2 and 3 that I talked about at the beginning. And that we really, this is kind of an admonition here, but we really neglect site scale research like what we were doing here. We're looking at one site and its surroundings at our peril if we are interested in settlement pattern studies. Because if we're getting stuff wrong at this level, if we try to expand that out to the regional scale, we're going to miss all kinds of stuff, or we're going to get population estimates that are way too high or way too low. So until we figure it out at this level, we really have to be careful before we go for that next. So promises kept. Well, find lost cities. Yes, yes, LiDAR does that. It has kept that promise. Revolutionize Maya settlement pattern studies in the kind of paradigm shifting way. Well, maybe. I would say it gives us a somewhat less enthusiastic yes. It can do it, I think. Has it done it yet? I don't think we're quite there because there are some issues here. Illuminate Maya land use strategies. We are definitely not there yet. Well, we are knocking it. And we need more people to kind of think about this from both a kind of indigenous knowledge perspective of how the Maya use their land. And 2, to kind of get away from the, well, we need to find all the little lines that show us where the connections, that kind of stuff. And think about the landscapes. And if we do that, combine it with our settlement data, we'll get there. Okay, so just some thank yous here. Thank you all, North Texas Archaeological Society, for having me in. I think my new employers are Christopher Goodwin Associates for letting me come out and give this talk when I should be working there. And then some of our funders here. So thank you very much.
Okay, any questions in the room? Yes.
I'm Naomi Cleghorn. I'm at UTA, and I am not a Mayanist, so I have, a great deal of ignorance on this subject. But this is fascinating work. I love the results that I'm seeing coming out of LiDAR. I was wondering, when you're doing these large landscape surveys, maybe this is not an issue, but are you pretty sure that inhabitation of these structures is contemporaneous, or is it like, is it possible that things are shifting around temporally?
Yeah, that's a great question. And without more excavation, we can't answer that definitively. But there were several earlier, I won't say early, there were 1970s, 80s, so on, studies there in the Maya Lowlands. And basically the kind of synthesis that comes out of that is that in most places where you have the classic period center, which we know the core of El Pilar goes from the middle pre-classic all the way to the terminal classic. So it's about 3,000 years of occupation there. But where you have a classic period center, the settlement around it, you can reasonably assume that maybe 90% of those mounds have a classic period component. Now, that's about as good as we can get at there in terms of were they all occupied at the same time within the classic period? Probably not. But we don't have a good way to get at that yet. We don't have the right data set there. So what we can do is kind of make baseline models. We can incorporate adjustments that we do into population estimates when we look at that to adjust for contemporaneity and do that. But no, to say that these were all occupied at the same time, no, we can't do it.
Then would that affect your estimates of the variability of economic status within that? I mean, would it be, rather than all these different levels of prosperity within level, were they all simultaneous, or was it like they started at a lower level and the whole thing grew up? So the larger homes would have been later than the others, or vice versa? I mean,
yeah, that's another thing. So with that inequality study that we did, we basically had a bunch of people at different sites who had this similar kind of LiDAR data, and we applied some methods to measure the volume of these mounds across, and we had to make assumptions to do that. And so usually, one reasonable assumption there is that if you're seeing something that's large at its kind of final phase, it's going to be generally that's at these places that's late classic. But if you're looking at that inequality again, yeah, the amount of control that we have over kind of temporal sequencing there is it's not great for what we have now. Usually the assumption there too is that if you have a large mound, large household group that will have been there, that family will have been there for a while, and there's going to be a lot earlier stuff underneath it. That's not always true. But yeah, these are kind of sticky issues. And so what we've been trying to do in these comparative studies is lay out our assumptions right out front. And when we publish these papers, that's what we do. And then basically say we're looking at baselines here. And until we get more kind of excavation data and stuff, we're really not going to have a definitive answer on that.
The expedition was about a topographical locating map of specific structures and their relations to one another and their approximate function, but never any consideration for picking a site to excavate. Is that not the nature of what you would do there, to take the next step in to get a closer ideas about the culture?
That is the next step, but the first step had to finish, which was to map the entire thing. So what we have now, and there's usually what you would do is do a kind of smaller area and test that, or maybe have graduate students that come in and do that as part of their MA or PhD work. The idea behind this project, and it was designed by, you can see her right in the center there of that slide, Annabelle Ford, was to basically map everything here. And so, and then, kind of leave the excavation up to a next step. But so now what we have there is kind of if we think of the reserve as kind of a confined sampling universe, like we have everything. We know where all the small mounds are, we know where all the groups are, we know where all those SRS things I was talking about are, we know where the quarries are. And so we have probably the most complete map of a large area like that in Maya Lowlands. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. The next step is to go begin to answer some of these questions, maybe about contemporaneity and that kind of stuff, by doing the excavations, by testing this stuff. And so we can come up with hypotheses now that we can then test with that.
Did you pick high probability spots where you think we really would like to start here? Or maybe, like you said, bring in graduate students and give them a minor thing to get a sense of it?
Well, I have like 100 student projects in my head. I mean, there are, the more you get out there and see the stuff and then look at it, so we would go out and map, and then we would come in, upload our GPS data, and then draw these things to the GIS map. And you go out and see it in the field, you bring it back, you see the big picture, and it's like, oh man, I don't want to give this to students, I want to go out and dig this myself, do this and that too. And so, yeah, there are a lot of different directions ways to go there, and hopefully we will get there going forward. That's the idea.
Just curious and not understanding the way that LiDAR, I mean, I understand the basics of how LiDAR works, but what were the things that were presenting as features but weren't, that you looked at and there wasn't anything there? What would do that?
Well, some of them, some of the things that definitely would show up as mounds that we saw were very large ant hills.
Oh.
So the leaf cutter ants and their bigger, nastier warrior cousins will build up these things, and I mean they could be 1/2 meter high and quite large. And so we would find that. We would find debris from the Cahoon or Corozo palms. These big palms that they have lots of nuts, little tiny coconut-like things, and they just leave piles and piles of trash on the ground. And you can find those showing up as mounds. We found linear things that showed up in the LiDAR as linear features. Go out on the ground and there's nothing there. And they might look almost exactly like terraces somewhere else where there are terraces. And there's just nothing there. So some of these things are probably data processing artifacts. Some of them probably relate to the amount of LiDAR ground points we're getting into different areas and our ability to really visualize that, put it together. But some of them are natural features that have signatures similar to cultural features.
And also the Choltuns, you're saying they're not showing up, so it doesn't show the hole in the ground, is then what you're saying?
Yeah, no, they don't. And so they do show up in Yucatan in their LiDARs. That's because Choltuns up there are very different from what we have down in Belize, Guatemala. There, they will dig them right down to these platforms that they have their houses on top of, and they are big things. We're probably not even seeing half the Choltuns that actually exist in the field because they're still covered by caps. Because the Maya have these, and sometimes you find the caps near them, which is very cool because they're like this round rock pieces that are like lids, and they just put them on top. And a lot of those are probably still on. And I'd say, probably half of the Choltuns we found were by accident. They're not so much by accident when they're around a household site because we could find a house. But some of these things are like out in nowhere. It's like, why? What are you storing in here? What's the purpose of this? And that gets you thinking about other kinds of things. But no, they're the bigger ones might have openings like this. Smaller ones are in wider.
Thank you.
Anything on Zoom? We have a comment. Root balls from large tree falls can pop up in visualizations as well, leading to false positives. So just a comment.
Correct, yeah. Bryce?
When you did your survey, did you find any large amount of stones in a particular area?
You mean like?
Building stone?
You know, hey, if I could flip back, I think just one or two slides. This area, Burma, we call this, because there's all these berms which are showing up on the, on there is this kind of reddish stuff in here with the cross lines. Those are made of chert cobbles. And they're really, really bad quality chert. They are not tool stone at all. I've broken so many of them, they are garbage. And so like they're using that kind of stuff to make these berms, which we still do not quite know what they are. Our soil scientists took some samples of soils around them now. And they're going to be doing some chemical analyses of them. So hopefully we can see, I mean, we think they must be agriculturally related, but they also, I mean, they might have started as stones that were kind of dug up out of a, field or something like that. Stone, they're going to do with it. Need stuff out. So we do kind of find that. I mean, and sometimes like quarries, you'd find piles of stone that look like stockpiles, stuff like that.
We've got limestone.
Oh yeah. This whole area, all that green and all that stuff underneath there is limestone. So it's everywhere. It's everywhere. All the quarries that we find are all limestone. And yeah, it's all over the place.
Have any more questions from the room?
Just one more, current population in that region,
In this region here,
the region that you're studying, how many people, if anyone, lives in that area now?
well, and in this, so this is it's a protected reserve, so nobody lives
Okay,
there. So there was, let's see if I can get back to it. So you can kind of see it here. This, I mentioned at the very beginning, there's a minor center here called Choro. And down in this area, there used to be a spring that came up. And there were it was kind of a fugitive settlement around in that area in, say, the late 19th century, early 20th century, of people who were kind of like wanting to get away from the authorities. So in that area, and then in the 80s, there were people living, there was actually a milpa, a slash and burn milpa right in the downtown area. So people were back there doing some stuff. So people were living there relatively recently. They all had to kind of be removed when they made this binational peace park around it. And some of them were not happy to go. But you got to think it was kind of a rough life back there in more recent times. And the community around Choro did something to the head of that spring. They tried to divert it, and it dried up after that. So there used to be a beautiful waterfall down there, and it's gone. So people have been around in the area in recent times. There were mahogany loggers up there in the mahogany heyday, early 20th, late 19th century. And but right now nobody lives there, except for 2 or 3 permanent park rangers out there.
This is Belize, or is this Guatemala?
It's both. You're looking at both right here. So we say when we're out in the jungle, we never, you don't see a border out there. But if you look on the maps, the modern border kind of goes right through something like that. And so the bigger part of downtown is in Belize, downtown Allure, but then the bigger part of the reserve is actually in Guatemala.
All right, please join me in thanking Dr. Sherman. With that, I'll bring the September 14th meeting in the North Texas Archaeological Society to a close. We'll see you all next month, several times.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's right. West. West.
So,
Yeah.